Who was Nathan Knorr, and how did he become the president and faithful servant of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society? Well, first, we need to know the history of Nathan Knorr and one other person, Hayden Covington. Hayden Covington became an attorney and was admitted to the bar in 1933. He was baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in 1934 and invited to Bethel in 1939 to become the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society's leading counsel. In 1942, he was made vice president, succeeding Nathan Knorr, when he became the president after Rutherford's death until 1945, without being anointed. Remember, in my previous videos, how you had to be anointed to be on the board of directors? Judge Rutherford made an exception with Hayden Covington. If you look him up, you'll find out how many cases he won on behalf of all witnesses, as well as the organization. Covington and Rutherford were very much alike, and Rutherford really liked him, both because of what he did for the organization, and Rutherford just liked him personally. Covington was a very imposing, confident man, much like Rutherford was. They were both college educated, and Covington was very articulate. Now, this was the opposite of Nathan Knorr, who was not aggressive and would choose the meek approach rather than an aggressive one. He also only had a high school education. In the 1961 book, Let Your Name Be Sanctified, we see how Rutherford instructed 3 men in his final instructions. These men were Nathan Knorr and Fred Franz, who were both anointed, as well as Hayden Covington, who was not. Rutherford had wanted Covington to replace him as the president. They both thought very much alike regarding the organization and the way things were going. However, after Rutherford died on January 8, 1942, Nathan Knorr and Fred Franz explained to Covington that he could not take that position due to the fact that he was not anointed. Nathan Knorr then instituted a policy change that resulted in Covington having to step down as vice president in 1945, with Fred Franz replacing him. I do have to note, Nathan Knorr and Hayden Covington, even though they were both brothers in the faith, didn't like each other very much. I've read several books published by those who were eyewitnesses to this. Hayden Covington remained at Bethel as the organization's legal counsel until he finally left Bethel in 1963. So on January 13th, 1942, 5 days after Judge Rutherford died, Nathan Knorr was voted in as president of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, replacing the judge, and as such, becoming the faithful slave. So let's learn a little bit about Nathan Knorr. Nathan Knorr was baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses on July 4th, 1923, at the age of 18, after hearing a talk from Fred Franz. These 2 men eventually became very good friends, as you will come to find out. He became a Bethelite on September 6, 1923. He was elected director of the People's Pulpit Association when he was 28. Now, that is now known as the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York. He then became the vice president of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society in 1935. As we just learned, he then became the president of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and by de facto, the faithful slave in 1942. And boy, did he change things up. He first introduced the Theocratic Ministry School that featured Bible research and public speaking. During Rutherford's time, witnesses really didn't talk at the doors. They would just play Rutherford's talks on their phonographs at the doorsteps. But Nathan Knorr felt it was important that as a witness of Jehovah, you should be able to speak for yourself to witness to others. He then instituted the Gilead School in 1943. Between 1942 through 1946, worldwide branch offices went from 25 to 57. That number would increase to 97 over the next 30 years. He started acquiring real estate in Brooklyn, New York to expand the organization's world headquarters so the worldwide printing production could be expanded. He organized international assemblies that completely dwarfed any convention Rutherford had ever put on. Nathan Knorr basically turned the organization into the well-oiled machine that we see today. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. What are the doctrinal changes and any practices that were once accepted under Rutherford, later changed under Nathan Knorr? Well, this might not seem like anything, but the destruction of Jerusalem was changed from 606 BCE, as was taught under Russell and Rutherford, to 607 BCE. See, Fred Franz, who was known as the Bible scholar of that time, showed him how the 0 year had been missing, that you had to add that 0 year to be correct. Yet, that didn't change anything regarding 1914. Adam's creation date was changed 2 years, from 4028 BCE to 4026 BCE. Now that might not seem like a big deal, but just wait until we get to 1975, and it becomes a big deal. In 1944, he identified the governing body as being synonymous with the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. It was also that year he started to state that blood transfusions were forbidden in the Bible, something the first two faithful servants did not state. And that's the change we're going to go over in this video. Charles Taze Russell had maintained that the reference to abstaining from the eating of blood at Acts 15 was a suggestion to be given to Gentile converts. A 1925 issue of the Golden Age commended a man for donating blood 45 times without payment. In 1927, the Watchtower noted that in Genesis 9, God decreed that Noah and his offspring must not eat the blood because the life is in the blood. The 1940 Consolation magazine reported a woman who had accidentally shot herself with a revolver in her heart, yet survived a major surgical procedure during which an attending physician donated a quart of his own blood for transfusion. The article goes on to show how this blood saved her life, and today the woman lives and smiles gaily over what happened. It wasn't until 2 years later, in 1944, that Nathan Knorr asserted that the decrees contained both in Genesis and Leviticus forbade the eating or drinking of blood in biblical times, whether by mouth or now by transfusion. In September 1945, representatives of the Watchtower Society in the Netherlands commented on blood transfusions in the Dutch edition of the Consolation magazine. The English translation of their comments reads, "When we lose our life because we refuse inoculations that does not bear witness as a justification of Jehovah's name, God never issued regulations which prohibit the use of drugs, inoculations, or blood transfusions. It is an invention of people who, like the Pharisees, leave Jehovah's mercy and love aside." However, the English July 1945 issue of the Consolation by the Watchtower Society headquarters in the United States applied the doctrine on blood to prohibit blood transfusions of whole blood, whether allogenic or autologous. But it did not specify any measures to be taken for one who did accept a transfusion. But by January 1961, accepting a transfusion became a disfellowshipping offense. So my question is, if vaccines weren't actually scripturally wrong, even though the governing body at that time said they were, and organ transplants, they said they were scripturally wrong, being cannibalistic at the time, what about blood transfusions? Could those possibly just be other cherry-picked scriptures, once again, used to back whatever the governing body decided in 1944 as going against Scripture? Prior to that, it was not a disfellowshipping offense. Within the last 20 years, blood fractions have become available for us. Prior to that, they were disfellowshipping offenses. Again, not based on Scripture, but Scripture to back opinion. See, the Scriptures have not changed, but the stance of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society has. Remember, receivers of organ transplants were cannibals. That's why it's so important to learn the history of the organization, what was taught at one time and then changed. Was the doctrinal change on blood transfusions actually biblical? The Watchtower Bible and Tract Society at one time stated vaccines were harmful and disgusting, and that having an organ transplant was considered cannibalistic. So shouldn't the organization be responsible for all the lives lost at that time who needed a vaccine or organ transplant? If the Bible really states that we are not to store our blood or take in blood, why is it okay to use someone else's blood fractions that have been stored? Why is it okay to have blood fractions and not whole blood? Aren't they one and the same? The fraction comes from the blood. Where in the Bible does it state that fractions are okay? Fractions, for that matter, at one time were not allowed. So shouldn't the organization be responsible for all witness lives lost from not being able to have a blood fraction that are now allowed? So is the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society responsible for thousands and thousands of lives lost for not receiving a blood transfusion, including those of children? The organization, since Nathan Knorr, have told witness parents that it is their biblical duty to let their child die if in need of a blood transfusion. But let me ask you a question. What's more important, the symbol of life itself, blood, or the life Jehovah gave you? How responsible is the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society for all those lives lost? In 1945, Nathan Knorr started the institution of disfellowshipping as we see it today. But weren't there those who were disfellowshipped before 1945? What were the changes that he instituted? What changes affect all witnesses today? Well, come back to find out. If you've enjoyed this video, please like algorithms. And if you really enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you can get notified of new videos. And as always, thank you for watching.